What is the government saying to families on low incomes in today's budget? Let them eat cake. That's what it's saying. It says, don't worry about an increase in GST and rising food prices because the rich eat more than the poor, so they'll pay more in GST. Is that meant to make low-income families feel better? You might not be able to afford to buy more food, but just think of the GST you're saving by not eating. The rich have a choice. If you want to spend more money and pay more GST, they can choose whether to upgrade the Mercedes or buy another boat. Those on lower incomes can't choose whether or not to eat, Mr. Speaker. What is John Key saying to New Zealand families struggling to pay the bills and make ends meet on low incomes? He tells them, stop being envious. Well, they won't be envious, Mr. Key, they'll be angry, like I am. Are New Zealand families more or less equal after this budget? They are less equal. And shame on the Prime Minister and the Minister of Finance and all those who support him. After today's budget, the most wealthy New Zealanders will take home thousands of extra dollars a week compared to those on average incomes. People like Telecom CEO, who earned $7 million last year, will get a tax cut of $6,608 per week. State sector CEOs who earn more than $600,000 in some cases will get a tax cut of nearly $500 a week. If you're earning $50,000, however, after you pay more in GST at the supermarket alone, you'll take home about $5 a week, and the chances are that'll be wiped out by inflation anytime soon. Is the CEO who got a $1,000 a week pay rise last year really the highest priority for a $700 a week tax cut this year? New Zealand is now on a par with the United Kingdom, which has one of the most entrenched income gaps between rich and poor in the world. Our ancestors, Mr. Speaker, came to this country to get away from that kind of inequality. John Key is determined to bring it back from his speculating years overseas. Others might be taken in by the Prime Minister's rags to riches story, not me. I remember he helped to make a pot of money speculating against the New Zealand dollar in the 1980s at a cost to New Zealand of $700 million. Guess what? At the same time, New Zealand's increasing rate of income inequality became one of the worst in the OECD. Over the same period, Australia closed the income gap between rich and poor. And Mr. Key wants to emulate Australia, and he goes in exactly the opposite direction. Income inequality widened again under national governments in the 90s. I won't mention the ones in the 80s. And it started to get better during the period of Labor-led government in the 1999 to 2008 period. Mr. Key misled the House yesterday, Mr. Speaker, when he said, and I quote, income gaps between rich and poor become worse under the previous Labor government. No, Mr. Key, they became better. And it's set to become worse under this national government. And, Mr. Speaker, I'll table the facts after this speech to prove just that. So here they are. Under a Labor progressive government between 2001 and 2008, everyone became richer, even Mr. Key. But those on low middle incomes increased their wealth by most, thanks to the Working for Families tax break. We closed the gap. National is again going to widen it. The Prime Minister also said yesterday that it was a terrible injustice that 10% of the wealthiest New Zealanders pay 44% of the tax. So, and he used to invite New Zealanders to go to Australia and pay less. Well, what's the truth of that? In Australia, the top 10% don't pay 44% of the tax, they pay 46% of the tax. So should we all go to Australia and pay some more? I mean, where does Mr. Key come from? Does he read anything? Turns out that what most countries do is exactly that. Those who earn more pay more tax because they earn a higher share of income. That's what's called a progressive fair tax system. I don't think Mr. Key's ever heard of it. But John Key is no Robin Hood. I saw Robin Hood the other night. He looks more like the Sheriff of Nottingham to me, and this is a Sheriff of Nottingham budget. Will the average New Zealander be better off after the Sheriff's budget? No, because they will not be getting the lion's share of the tax cut. The top 10% of income earners will. Guess who got the lion's share from last round of tax cuts by the national government? The same top tax earners. Has the penny dropped yet? If people are not on a high income, this government is not interested and is not going to help. Some might have voted for them in 2008, but they can make this National Party-led government a one-term government in 2011, the first time since 1975, and good riddance to them, I say. If New Zealanders are on an average income and have aspirations to do better, forget it. This is a budget that puts reinforced glass into the glass ceiling. This government is showing its true colours today, Mr. Speaker. It doesn't want our people to prosper. It wants them to know their place. Don't be envious. Don't worry about not having to buy any food, because you'll be saving some GST, for goodness sake. This government is out of touch with the way in which poorer and low-income people live in this country. Will there be more children lifted out of poverty after today's budget? The answer is no. A recent UNICEF survey of the well-being of children puts New Zealand almost last, 24th out of 25 countries. It measured immunisation levels, infant deaths and early death from injury and illness. Greece's economy, where the ministers have laughed at Greece over recent times, it's collapsing, the streets are on fire, the people protest, but you know what? They're way ahead of New Zealand when it comes to looking after their kids. Way ahead. Here's what a respected professor of epidemiology in New Zealand said recently, quote, "In New Zealand, social injustice, which means income inequality, is killing and maiming our kids on a grand scale." And what do we mean by that? We top the scales for OECD rates of whooping cough, rheumatic fever, pneumonia and other diseases in children. And I want to ask, do these tax cuts to the richest New Zealanders help any of that? The answer is they do not. They make it worse, because the government denudes itself of income to do it. We spend less than the OECD average on child health, and the only thing that will change as a result of this budget is that this appalling situation will actually get worse. 28% of our children still live in poverty. The government I was proud to be associated lifted 100,000 kids out of poverty, and we're heading in the right direction. This goes in exactly the opposite direction. And I was disgusted to hear the backbenchers in that party clap for that. Clap for it. They don't understand what they're doing. It's absolutely disgraceful. This rate started to decline under the last Labor Progressive government for the first time in decades. Working for families lifted, as I said, 100,000 children out of poverty. Senior people in the medical profession know what the problem is. I had two professors of child health yesterday write to me, and I think they wrote to all other parliamentarians, saying that on their watch they were absolutely embarrassed by the fact that things have got worse for kids, and they were begging the government not to make them worse this time. Well, they're going to be deeply disappointed. And I was touched by that letter. How do you get rid of poverty, Mr. Speaker? You increase people's incomes. You give them decent wages and jobs. Will there be more jobs after today? Will there what? There is nothing in this budget to create new jobs. Where on earth the Minister of Finance gets his figures? How many jobs were created by the Prime Minister's great thing of a cycleway from North to Bluff? The answer is none. Not one single one. How many jobs have been created by the amount of money invested in research, science and technology, which we provided $2,000 million for in the Fast Forward budget? The answer is not 1 cent. Not 1 cent in its 18 months since this government was elected. This country doesn't have a tax problem, Mr. Speaker. We have one of the most modest income rates for low to middle income people in the world. It has a wage problem. And there's nothing in this budget to fix that at all. If John Key thinks that cutting the top tax rate will stop young doctors and entrepreneurs going overseas, he's dreaming. Australia's top rate is 45 cents in the dollar, and we've already discovered the top 10% pay more tax there than they do here. So what's that as an incentive? And John Key should ask himself why he left the country to go into the world of international speculation. Did he leave to avoid our high taxes? No. I don't think so. I think he left to get more money. That's what he left to get, and he succeeded, and good on him. But tax cuts for the wealthy won't increase the wage or incomes of ordinary New Zealanders. Will the economy grow as a result of the sheriff's budget today? No. There is nothing in this budget for increased exports. The government is dreaming if it thinks otherwise. Mr. Speaker, you're telling me to wind up, and I will. But this budget doesn't turn out to be the smiley Robin Hood budget. It turns out to be the nasty Sheriff of Nottingham's budget.